I still remember the first step I took onto the deck of the cruise ship as if it were etched in my memory forever. The cool sea breeze brushed against my face, and the endless blue horizon promised both escape and confrontation. I, Susan, had come on this journey with a heart heavy with uncertainty, seeking space from a marriage that had lost its spark. My husband, Scott, and I had agreed to take this trip as a way to figure things out separately. A temporary reprieve from the daily arguments and silent treatments that had become our norm. I boarded the ship with a mix of hope and trepidation. I hoped that the change of scenery and the salty air would clear the fog of regret and anger that clouded my mind. Yet, deep down, I sensed that this voyage would stir up more than just gentle waves. It would awaken desires and secrets that lay dormant for too long. Scott, too, had his own reasons for wanting to be alone on this journey. His eyes, once filled with warm familiarity, now seemed distant as he packed his bags. He muttered about needing space and time to think, leaving me to wonder if we were ever truly in sync. I clung to the thought that distance might heal our wounds, even if only temporarily, and set off with a cautious optimism. As I roamed the ship's promenade, I found solace in the rhythmic sound of the ocean. The ship was a floating world of glittering lights and hushed conversations. I soon noticed a man sitting alone at a small table near the bar. His confident posture and easy smile caught my eye. He introduced himself as Melvin, a charming and enigmatic stranger whose presence stirred a quiet excitement in me. There was something about him that suggested he, too, was searching for a break from the ordinary, from a life that had grown too predictable. Not far away, I caught sight of Scott and his gaze locked with a striking woman named Sharon. She exuded an air of mystery and allure that seemed to pull Scott toward her. Even from a distance, I could tell that their meeting was more than mere chance. There was an electric tension in the air, a spark that neither of them could easily ignore. It pained me to see Scott so taken, yet I felt an odd comfort in knowing we were both, in our own ways, seeking refuge from the confines of our troubled marriage. The ship sailed smoothly along the coast, and as night fell, its decks transformed into a world of subdued lighting and whispered secrets. I spent my evenings on the balcony of my cabin, watching the moon dance on the waves, and wondering if solitude was the answer or merely the beginning of something unexpected. In those quiet moments, I began to feel the stirrings of a forbidden longing, a desire that was as frightening as it was exhilarating. Little did I know that the spaces we sought would soon be filled by encounters that would challenge every belief I held about love and loyalty. The ship, with all its opulent charm and hidden corners, was ready to reveal secrets I had never imagined. As I stood there, lost in thought under the starry sky, a part of me wondered if this journey would heal the wounds between Scott and me or tear us apart forever. And so, with the sound of the lapping waves beneath my feet and the promise of new beginnings on the horizon, I took my first steps into a story of desire, betrayal, and unexpected twists. A story where every decision would carry consequences that none of us were prepared for. The morning after our first night at sea, I awoke to a quiet solitude that seemed to echo the vast, endless ocean outside my cabin window. The gentle hum of the ship in motion offered little comfort as I struggled with the loneliness that had crept into my heart. I, Susan, had come on this journey hoping for clarity and space, yet the emptiness was overwhelming. I spent the early hours by the pool, lost in thought as the water shimmered under the early sun, trying to drown out the familiar ache of isolation. After a light breakfast in the softly lit dining room, I set out to explore the ship's corridors and decks. The vast expanse of the ship, filled with laughter and conversations, only accentuated the void I felt inside. Every face seemed to belong to someone with a story, while I felt like an outsider, drifting aimlessly. It wasn't long before I encountered Melvin again, a presence that both startled and intrigued me. I found him seated on a quiet bench near a flowered alcove on the promenade. His relaxed posture and easy smile were like a balm to my frayed nerves. "Good morning, Susan," he said warmly, his eyes lighting up with genuine interest. I was taken aback by his familiarity. It felt as though he remembered me from our brief exchange the night before. I returned his greeting, and soon we fell into an effortless conversation about the beauty of the open sea and the mysteries of a life far removed from our daily routines. There was something in Melvin's tone that hinted at a shared understanding, a mutual recognition of the need for escape. As we walked along the deck, our conversation deepened. I found myself confessing the confusion and sorrow that had taken root in my marriage with Scott. The decision for both of us to seek space, we had thought, would be a temporary remedy. Instead, it had only magnified the emptiness inside me. Melvin listened with quiet empathy, and in return, he shared fragments of his own past, a history of heartache and regret that had driven him to search for solace on the open waters. While my connection with Melvin grew more intense with each passing hour, I could not shake the image of Scott. Earlier, I had caught sight of him engaged in animated conversation with a striking woman, Sharon, near the ship's grand atrium. At first, I told myself it was nothing more than a casual interaction. But as the hours wore on, subtle gestures, a shared laugh, a brief touch, betrayed a deeper attraction. The thought of Scott with someone else stirred a cocktail of emotions within me: jealousy, relief, and a bitter taste of betrayal. That evening, as the ship's lights dimmed and the stars emerged above, I found solace on a quiet, secluded deck. The gentle whisper of the ocean and the cool night air wrapped around me, offering a momentary escape from my tangled thoughts. Melvin joined me, and our conversation shifted to more intimate revelations. The warmth in his gaze and the soft inflection of his voice stirred something forbidden within me. In a quiet, almost imperceptible gesture, our hands brushed against each other, a touch that sent shivers down my spine. In that instant, all the barriers I had built began to crumble. We moved away from the crowded deck to a hidden corner near a line of potted plants, where shadows played on the deck and whispered promises of secrecy. There, under the soft glow of distant lights, our conversation slowed. The silence between us was heavy with unspoken confessions, each beat of my heart urging me forward into uncharted territory. As the night deepened, so did our connection. I could feel the weight of each moment, a silent question lingering in the cool air. Was this moment of escape the beginning of something liberating, or merely a dangerous detour from a life already in disarray? Even as passion and desire mingled with the night's mystery, a small, cautious voice inside me warned that nothing on this voyage was ever as simple as it seemed. I stood there, caught between the comfort of a newfound intimacy and the looming uncertainty of what lay ahead, knowing that every stolen moment was edging us closer to a fate none of us could have foreseen. The night after that electric evening on the deck, I found myself caught in a whirlwind of emotion and desire that I could neither fully embrace nor completely deny. I, Susan, felt the pull of something dangerous and intoxicating, a connection that had grown in the quiet spaces between stolen glances and secret smiles. As I wandered the ship's dim corridors, my thoughts kept returning to Melvin and the subtle promises his eyes had made. The ship had transformed into a labyrinth of hidden corners and whispered confessions, and I felt drawn to explore each forbidden passage. Later that evening, when the crowd had thinned and the festive chatter gave way to a calm, subdued murmur, I sought out the quiet alcove near the ship's upper deck. It was a secluded area, lit by soft, ambient lights that cast long, mysterious shadows. I found Melvin waiting there, his presence both reassuring and unnervingly intense. The moment our eyes met again, I sensed that we were about to cross a line that could never be uncrossed. We moved closer until there was barely any space between us. His hand reached out tentatively, then with growing assurance, brushed against the small of my back. That single touch sent an unexpected shiver racing down my spine. Our conversation had already dipped into intimate territory earlier, but here, in the hush of the night, our words gave way to something far more potent, a language of desire that needed no translation. I could feel his gaze, warm and persistent, urging me to let go of the boundaries I had clung to for so long. Before I knew it, our faces were almost inches apart, and his lips met mine with a softness that belied the intensity of the moment. The kiss was tentative at first, exploring, as if both of us were testing the waters of a secret we were about to share. Soon, the kiss deepened into one of passion and longing. I remembered every detail: the taste of salt and wine on his lips, the way his hands moved slowly, deliberately, igniting a fire inside me that I thought had long been extinguished. Under the shelter of the night sky and the quiet murmur of the ocean against the hull, our barriers began to crumble. His fingers traced the line of my jaw, down my neck, and I, in turn, felt compelled to surrender to the overwhelming desire for closeness. Every touch, every breath we shared, made it harder to recall the life I had momentarily set aside. The life with Scott, and the promise of space we had both sought in our separate ways. At that moment, it was only Melvin and me, adrift in a sea of passion and uncertainty. Even as my body responded eagerly to his every caress, my mind could not help but drift to the sight of Scott earlier that day. I had seen him laughing, so completely engaged with Sharon in a quiet corner of the ship's lounge. Their embrace, though brief, had carried a weight of familiarity and intensity that mirrored my own internal struggle. The thought of Scott with Sharon added another layer to the forbidden nature of our encounter, two parallel lines of betrayal that now threatened to converge in ways none of us had anticipated. In the privacy of that hidden alcove, every sensation felt heightened. I marveled at the way the soft fabric of my dress clung to my skin as Melvin's hands wandered with tender insistence. Our whispered confessions mingled with the distant sound of the ship's engines, creating a private symphony of shared secrets and unspoken promises. The room around us, though small and barely lit, seemed to contain an entire universe of emotions, a universe in which guilt and exhilaration coexisted in an almost tangible dance. Yet, amid the thrill of our secret liaison, a part of me could not shake the foreboding sense that we were treading on dangerous ground. Every kiss, every soft murmur in the dark, edged us closer to a precipice from which there might be no return. I wondered if the fleeting comfort of this encounter was worth the deep, enduring pain that might follow. As our embrace grew more fervent, I realized that in the quiet spaces of our passion, we were also crossing invisible lines. Lines that connected us not only to each other, but also to the lives we had left behind. As the night wore on and our time together drew to a reluctant close, I held on to the memory of that intense, forbidden intimacy with a mixture of longing and dread. The ship sailed on into the dark, and so did we, each of us unaware that the next twist in our intertwined stories would soon bring all our hidden truths crashing into the light. I had been lost in my own thoughts lately, haunted by the memory of Melvin's touch and the whispered promises of secret liaisons, when the fragile balance of my world began to crumble. One cool, quiet evening, as I strolled along a nearly deserted corridor near the ship's library, I heard voices that made my blood run cold. I recognized the deep, husky tone of Melvin, but right beside it was a familiar soft voice I had come to dread. Hesitant and curious, I slowed my pace, leaning against the wall to listen. "Melvin, I can't keep living like this," came the urgent words, barely above a whisper. "We're married, and what we're doing, it has to stop." There was a pause. A moment so pregnant with regret and resignation that I felt as if the air itself had thickened. Then Melvin replied, "I know, Sharon, but I can't help how I feel. Every moment away from you hurts, and this secret life is tearing me apart." In that moment, I realized with a sinking heart that the man who had ignited forbidden passion in me was not free, but bound by vows. To Sharon, the very woman whose magnetic presence had also drawn Scott into her orbit. The revelation was like a punch to the gut. My own betrayal, which I had once justified as a quest for solace and space, was entangled in a web of deception far more intricate than I could have imagined. Unable to shake the horror of what I'd just overheard, I retreated to my cabin in a daze, my mind reeling with conflicting emotions. Anger, guilt, and sorrow warred inside me. How could we all have fallen so deeply into our separate deceptions without even knowing they were intertwined? I spent a sleepless night tossing and turning, each minute amplifying the betrayal I felt, not just by my husband Scott, but by Melvin, and by the circumstances that had led us all here. The following day, I resolved to confront the truth head-on. I sought out Melvin in the quiet recesses of the ship's lounge, where the low murmur of conversation and the dim lighting provided little comfort against the storm raging within me. When our eyes met, his held a flicker of sorrow that sent shivers down my spine. I couldn't hold back any longer. "Melvin," I began, my voice trembling as much as my hands, "I need you to be honest with me." "I heard you. I heard you with Sharon." His face paled visibly, and for a long moment, he looked away as if burdened by the weight of a confession he had dreaded to make. "Susan, he started, then swallowed hard. "I never meant to hurt you. I am married to Sharon." The words hung in the air, each syllable a confirmation of the nightmare I feared was real. My heart pounded in my ears as I struggled to process the magnitude of the revelation. How had we all spiraled into this labyrinth of lies? The line between loneliness and betrayal, between desperate desire and moral collapse, had blurred beyond recognition. Before I could demand more answers, I felt a presence behind me. Turning slowly, I saw Sharon standing there, her eyes red and filled with a mixture of regret and desperation. "I'm so sorry, Susan," she murmured, her voice cracking under the strain of her own guilt. "I never wanted anyone to get hurt." Her apology did little to soothe the pain. Instead, it intensified the raw, bitter sting of betrayal. Here we were, 4 people adrift on a ship, our lives entangled in secrets and lies that threatened to shatter the fragile veneer of our supposed escapes. In that charged moment, I realized that our separate quests for solace had led us into a convergence of pain, a collision of hearts and promises that could no longer be undone. As the ship sailed on beneath an indifferent sky, I stood frozen between anger and despair, wondering how we would ever untangle the mess we had created. The truth had surfaced, and with it, an uncertain storm loomed on the horizon. One that promised to sweep away everything we thought we knew about love, loyalty, and ourselves. And so, with the sound of crashing waves echoing my inner turmoil, I braced myself for the reckoning that was to come, knowing that nothing would ever be the same again. In the days that followed the shattering revelations, the cruise ship that had once seemed a refuge of endless possibility turned into a floating prison of my own making. I, Susan, found myself grappling with the ruins of our shattered promises and the heavy burden of secrets laid bare. Every moment on board became a painful reminder of the choices I had made, and the cost of seeking solace in forbidden arms. The confrontation with Melvin and Sharon had left me reeling, each word of regret and sorrow echoing in the recesses of my mind. As the ship sailed steadily along the U.S. coastline, I spent long hours in solitude, wandering the deserted decks under a sky heavy with clouds and unanswered questions. My thoughts were a tempest of guilt, anger, and a lingering bittersweet desire for what might have been. I questioned whether the fleeting moments of intimacy had been a true escape or a cruel mirage that only deepened the wounds of betrayal. Scott, my husband, had been equally fractured by the revelations. I caught glimpses of him on the upper deck, staring out at the vast indifferent sea, his face etched with regret and a profound sense of loss. Our eyes met in passing, but neither of us dared to break the heavy silence that had replaced our once familiar connection. It was as if the ship itself was a silent witness to our crumbling vows, its every wave and gust of wind a reminder of our shared downfall. In the quiet hours of one sleepless night, I found myself sitting at the ship's bow, watching the water churn with restless energy. The cool air bit at my skin, and I wondered if the pain I felt was something I would ever truly overcome. I remembered the passionate nights with Melvin, the soft touches, the whispered promises, and the undeniable thrill of breaking away from a life that had grown monotonous and suffocating. Yet, each memory was tainted by the bitter taste of betrayal, not just to Scott, but to my own heart. I spent that night questioning every decision, every moment of weakness. I wondered if the search for space had been a disguise for deeper unhappiness, or if it was merely a catalyst for inevitable chaos. The encounter with Sharon, filled with apologies and shared guilt, did little to soothe the inner turmoil. Instead, it forced me to confront the reality that the boundaries we had so carelessly crossed had irrevocably altered all our lives. As the cruise neared its end, reality began to seep back in. We were all soon to return to our separate lives on land, a world where the consequences of our actions would no longer be hidden by the endless horizon of the ocean. The inevitable reckoning loomed ahead: difficult conversations with Scott, the unresolved pain between Melvin and Sharon, and the internal struggle to forgive myself for the choices I had made. In those final days, I sought solace in writing, pouring out every raw emotion onto paper, hoping that the act of confession might somehow mend the fractures within me. The experience left me with a profound understanding of the delicate nature of trust and the heavy price of secrecy. I came to realize that in our search for freedom and space, we had lost sight of the very things we cherished: our commitments, our integrity, and our own sense of self-worth. The ship, with its opulent halls and hidden corners, had been a stage for a drama of our own making, one that ended not in liberation, but in a quiet, soul-crushing reckoning with reality. Now, as I write these words and reflect on a journey that altered the course of my life, I am left with an aching question. Can the wounds of betrayal ever truly heal, or do they forever haunt the corners of our hearts? The answer remains elusive, hidden in the depths of my own introspection. Thank you for joining me on this tumultuous journey of passion, regret, and painful truth. If you found this story compelling, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more heartfelt tales and honest reflections on life's unpredictable twists.